The monarchy is powered by brave soldiers like you, kobolds, drakes, and all. Join YouTube memberships today to keep up the good effort and be honored in our Hall of Fame. Well, after all this time waiting, it's now just you and me, Samus. Welcome back to Royal Autopsy, my friends. A series where I take a moment to rave and rant about the games I have played, whether they be recent or old. And just as long as the wait has been for content on this channel, so too was it a long wait for the highly anticipated Metroid Prime 4. A vast, arid desert, one might even say. One where it felt like the hope of this game was but a distant mirage. Years of radio silence and uncertainty clouded the project, until on June 18, 2024, the announcement trailer showed off the first bits of gameplay and cinematics to ever be shown, standing out like a towering beacon for miles on end. Am I being too literal with my analogies here? Well, in any case, the excitement was most palpable, yet a phenomenon most curious soon befell this game. As quickly as there was renewed hype, so too was there a drastic silence, even tension in the air. Whether it be due to the over decade-long expectations being too much to bear, the contrast in comparison to recent ventures like the highly acclaimed Metroid Dread, or the subsequent trailers that put a focus on new, controversial characters, the situation quickly changed. Now it felt as if people didn't know what to think of Samus Aran's newest adventure, unsure of its direction and if it even was Metroid anymore. It all begs the question of if the wait was even worth it. And that's what I am here to talk about, giving my piece to all of you through my own thoughts and experience on Metroid Prime 4. Which, let me tell you, you have no idea how much I have been waiting for this. Because with every bit that I faintly heard, every statement and opinion, trying to keep myself as free and open-minded as possible, the more I just had to know what was with this game. To the point of it unironically becoming the most hyped game for me in a bit. For games like this deserve a fair, open shot. So let's not waste any more time. We've got a score to settle. As part of a legacy that forever changed how first-person shooter games played, even how they were directed, there's a certain feel and fluidity that Metroid Prime 4 is expected to nail down. And I'm happy to say that the overall movement feels just as silky smooth as it did in the original trilogy. Everything that you expect and remember from 1 through 3 is here and accounted for. From that oh-so-iconic HUD and visor perspective, radar and map in the top corners, to weapon selection, missile count, and arm cannon front and center showing what you are ready to blast. I know it sounds like such a generic, pointless thing to compliment, but it's important to note considering just how long it has been since the last installment all the way back on the Wii, the switching of hands and manpower of new and old faces. If a game in a long-running series, one of pedigree like this doesn't have the feel of the basic systems, then it can ruin the entire feel of the game. Which it gladly doesn't. It all feels exactly like it did on the original games, perhaps even better depending on the control scheme. For reference, I played through the game on a Switch Pro controller with twin sticks for moving and aiming the camera, sensitivity for both at 40, and motion controls for free aiming off. I'm sure with pointer or even mouse controls on Switch 2 that it feels amazing, but this is just what's easiest for me given my setup. And with the new power-ups and abilities you get throughout, it is especially fun. Dare I say, this may even be the most creative and expressive combat in a Metroid Prime game yet. Sure, some of the stuff you get in the game is pretty standard in what you'd expect. Naming convention not exactly being original with such great names as the Psychic Space Jump, Psychic Spider Ball, or Ice Shot, but stuff like the control beam shows the creativity of the game. While at first it may seem as just a simple puzzle solver, The control beam allows for excellent crowd control by slowing down time when fired, allowing you to hit multiple targets if they are less durable, or aim for a weak point on an enemy's body. Even in said simple puzzle situations, there were times where I forgot and was subsequently surprised by just how useful this tool is. There's also the ability to condense and essentially store morph ball bombs as psychic motes, allowing you to lay them on the field, picking up and chucking them at switches or even enemies. And check this shit out, you can do that same tech to fucking power bombs, breaking down large walls and rubble, and even yeeting miniature nukes at enemies. God, that's satisfying. There's a strength in the sometimes simplistic tools you're given, right down to elemental beam shots of fire, ice, and lightning. At first, I was a bit concerned, to be honest. Metroid Prime 2 also included something similar with dark, light, and annihilator beams that also used up a completely new ammo resource. And that felt a bit limiting having these cool beam weapons to use, but not having a lot to go around. But I didn't really run into such problems, at least on normal difficulty. And with the amount of shot ammo you have in the game at 530 in total, there's no need for concern, at most using 20 a pop for the fully charged blast. Fire burns things pretty effectively, ice is good for the classic Metroid strat of freeze and missile, crowd controlling enemies around you, and lightning, oh boy. I swear to God, you feel like Emperor Palpatine once you get this thing. This shit already chain blasts onto nearby enemies with a basic fire, even making electronic turrets susceptible to a quick kill by psychic lasso, but then the supercharge just ramps it up into a constant stream of destruction that annihilates anything in its path, while still bouncing up to multiple targets. It is the room nuke option of a game, even once you get the power bombs. And spoiler alert ahead, but I even like the utility of the Legacy suit. 35 missiles for a temporary barrier at basically the ending of the game may seem pointless, but considering how much damage enemies in this game can deal, especially Psylux or in hard mode, it is incredibly helpful for having that extra bit of safety on attacks or enemies you aren't sure of. Plus, the aesthetic of the Legacy suit is just awesome, building upon the already great design of the Viola suit, and having a really nice effect pop when you activate the barrier. Speaking of aesthetics, the art design of the game. Say what you will about its gameplay or narrative, but you cannot convince me that the art direction of this game isn't gorgeous. Genuinely, this is one of the prettiest games I have ever played by a long shot. And this isn't even the best it could be. Again, I'm on a basic-ass Switch, one that's pretty close to being a launch version. So the fact that this game has so much vibrance and life in it is a monument to the genius of the art team, and further solidifies the value of strong art direction and style over just stronger hardware for realism like ray tracing. I really don't know how to describe it. Just the way color contrast is used, the mixing in primary colors and the major visuals, shape language like in the jagged towers of the Volt Forge, glow and lighting for the lava of the flare pool, the cold freezing isolation of the Ice Belt Lab, or the darkness deep underground in the Great Mines. It all does such a good job at illustrating this lustrous, rich world of culture and progress, a people who became masters of the elements to better their kind, creating massive megastructures dedicated to their hope, their faith, their kindness. It's beautiful in the legacy they leave behind, but also tragic. Like, there's an overwhelming sadness in seeing how far they got, yet there were still things they couldn't control, tragedies that could not be averted, having to place the last of their hope in salvation, not to save their people from annihilation, but that other races would learn from them, never knowing if their salvation will ever appear. It's beautiful, in the way that something transient and ethereal is. Dare I say, the tragedy of a Lemorne, how it is told through the art direction, makes them the greatest, but most heartbreaking ancient civilization in all of Metroid, only rivaled by the Chozo. That is saying a lot for the one and likely only game they will appear in, just off art design alone. The music throughout also does a lot to help in these aspects, and is one of the game's biggest strong suits. When that first announcement trailer and bit of gameplay was shown off, opening up to our first look of Fury Green with the music blasting in the background, I swear I ascended. It felt so good to hear something like that in a Metroid game after so long, especially after Dread. Because not to make this all about comparisons or contrasts, games can stand on their own 2 feet and stuff like this can get messy, but I can't really say I remembered anything from Metroid Dread's original soundtrack. The best I could give is probably Ravenbeak's fight, but that's about it without actively looking back. And it was such a weird low point for an otherwise amazing game. With Prime 4, the whole thing is littered with certified earworms head to bottom, right from the get-go with the main title theme as you boot up the game, returning us to the lovely Prime soundscape we oh so love. To our first introduction of Viros with Chrono Tower, establishing those common Lemorn leitmotifs as we take in the bizarre, symmetrical, ethereal architecture. The first step we take in Fury Greens and the absolute beauty in the physical representation of the Lemorn's preserved legacy. The electronic beeps and hums that foreshadow Silux's arrival. The choir telling of his deep-seated rage as we blast into combat. And the panic and intensity in the Ice Belt labs, as we attempt to make it back up to the top to rescue Takabe, as everything that was once frozen defrosts. There's so many more tracks I want to cover or talk about, but that would inflate the video's length even more, so let's not. Suffice to say, Prime 4's soundtrack is really good, and sets the mood perfectly. Further accentuated by the series' best incorporation of high-octane, interesting set pieces via level design. Sure, the levels might not have the most complexity in the world in terms of overlapping, connecting, bridging paths, but the joy in traversing them, taking in the sights, and engaging with them is really fun. Vault Forge essentially has you going through different parts of assembly line, with each tower and room dedicated to the storage, building, scanning, and testing of various Viola components, all to eventually be tested on a big racetrack that people can partake in for their license, and then shipped out of the facility. Icebelt may be a simple ice map, but does a lot with its aesthetic through a tense, nerve-wracking wolfpack fight that I barely survived through, the howling wind and windmills littered throughout the icy canyons, and the laboratory. Oh my god, the laboratory! Genuinely my single favorite location in the entire game, bar none. The atmosphere in this place, the desolation and icy silence, the lore and story you slowly begin to pick up on, all before the weight of it crumbles down on top of you. I may just make a video dedicated to it to cover in more detail. Flarepool has this really neat refinery aesthetic, with the Lemorn utilizing this facility to process green energy from the earth and harness it into special pods that shoot out of a damn volcano to propagate the land. You get to see all the little channels and pipes for green energy filtration, the ventilation and power needed to run a place this size, all of which sits upon a massive lake of lava that you yourself ride across as you fight against the colossal serpent Phaneros, culminated in a hectic escape sequence as the place melts down. And the Great Mind with its multiple layers presents itself like a gauntlet, each one slowly taking away your comforts and allies, as each one makes the effort to help you along just that little bit further amidst the hordes of grievers heading your way. This place of quieting, suffocating discomfort, where even the slightest accidental sound will alert grievers to your immediate location, culminated in the brutal fight against the Omega Griever, the pinnacle of the Lemorne's mistakes in this Hall of Tragedy, having brutally killed the Guardian that you would have fought if you had just gotten here that little bit sooner. Which, speaking of those Guardians, let's talk about those boss fights, eh? The boss roster all around in this game is really good, with most of them being of a high enough quality to not be outright boring or bad. A lot of the major bosses have the common trait of these big, blue, bulbous weak points on their body, as early on, in fact, as the tutorial boss. This is because they have all been hijacked by Metroid Fusion. No, not the game. Specifically, Sylux and his band have developed a special breed of Metroids that allow them to assimilate and even take over their host. And as we learn from lore documents, if it wasn't for the hijack, all the Guardians would probably be on good terms with Samus or even hand the teleporter keys over. They all have a given name and some semblance of sapience, which allowed them to even communicate with the Lemorne and coexist. People could say the Metroid weak points are the devs dumbing down the game for big obvious Zelda weak points compared to the subtlety of the past games, but I'm not sure about that. The series isn't exactly innocent in having big obvious weak points. And even then, I don't think they do anything to detract from the quality of the bosses. Abarax sets the tone and even incorporates early utilization of different hype beam waves as well as aiming and timing for specific parts. Carvex is a great opening note for Guardian bosses, requiring constant movement and awareness when open and vulnerable due to the spikes that form along the ground, and being one of the best showcases the practicality of the control beam. Zelios has a banger electric guitar theme that complements the always shifting defensive automaton that must be slowly chipped away to reach a core. Gyarados does everything in its power to hide the Metroid core, pelting you with waves of freezing ice crystals as you goad the beast into charging and exposing its weak points. Can I also just say that it is just really cute? Phaneros I already mentioned in terms of the arena and size, and the spectacle is definitely the most impressive thing about him. But he also elevates the multi-stage nature of boss fights in this game with distinct phases. First requiring you to use the Viola to target and immobilize his body, before then taking the fight to the head to target the Metroid cores through orbs and beams of fire. A neat detail I do like about the fight is that while the Metroid cores are the intended way to fight him, good timing and aiming can allow you to hit the ton while he is still up and active. And the finishing blow being a control beam to the core inside his body is really cool. Omega Griever was also mentioned before, and he's just really cool. It took me a few moments to register what I was supposed to target since, again, unlike the other bosses, he hasn't been taken over by a Metroid. But I do find it a really neat pace change that makes the player think on their toes and later on, consider what parts of the unarmored body to aim for as the monster swipes and charges, even calling in other Grievers to swarm you while it powers up, or trying to pin you down with a ton of it. Even resorting to faking you out with the item literally dangling off its tongue like bait. And Sylux? Oh my god, Sylux. All of his fights are just sublime. And I'm sure for people who grew up with Prime Hunters, it must feel so cathartic seeing him make a comeback all these years later with the exact same leitmotifs, attacks, and tricks he had originally, with each fight ramping up the difficulty by introducing unique moves and tricks to his arsenal. Like how in the second fight, there are moments where he will electrocute the floor, and force you onto the walls and hook points scattered throughout the arena, making use of your newly acquired Psychic Lasso ability. You all know I love rival fights, so it's no surprise to hear that I love the fights against Sylux. The only major boss that I'd say falls flat is Varmus, and that's mostly because the fight is just boring. It takes place in Soul Valley and forces you onto Viola for the entire thing, using the beam to slow down Varmus enough so you can ram into his weak point on the tail with a boost. There's just nothing particularly engaging or expressive about the way this fight is done, and it doesn't really change even as you whittle it down. You are doing the same thing over and over again with no pattern adjustments, no attack modifiers, nothing. You aren't even harmed if you get hit, merely falling off the bike only to call it back seconds later. It also commits the grave sin of being a mandatory boss in a game like this, while not even having a unique theme to its name. Ugh. Well, on the topic of Soul Valley and Viola, I suppose it's time to get into that whole shebang, eh? Alright, fine. Let's get it over with. Breath of the Wild brought a huge change to the gaming industry back when it debuted in 2018, showing the possibility of an open world and game design to the usual established formula of dungeons. In its wake, plenty of other games and studios followed, and it wasn't just those outside of Nintendo. Even internally, there was talk of other Nintendo properties borrowing a few pages from Breath of the Wild, and Metroid Prime 4 was one of them. According to an official Famitsu translation by Nintendo Everything, developers early on in the development of Prime 4 took to noticing the reception of Breath of the Wild, as well as the various suggestions people had on if Metroid could take in some of those ideas. The idea of an open-world Metroid, however, conflicted with the way progression works. So instead of making it a completely open world, they relegated to making the game split between different zones, with one central zone that people could explore around. This central zone would come to be known as Soul Valley, or just the desert. Certainly a big zone, alright. One that would be quite troublesome to traverse entirely on foot. So the next step was to create a fun mode of transportation for easier access, thus giving us the Viola. I'm saying all this now and going forward in order to paint a clear picture of this game and, more importantly, give a reason as to why things turned out the way they did. Cause it's easy to rag and hate on something, especially without reason. Having a reason does not excuse all wrongdoings, of course, but context is important. In looking at this context, I want to examine the structure of Soul Valley in the lens of a semi-open world aspect. I ain't a game designer, of course, but I figure this would be a fun way to talk about the negatives here. So, firstly, what's the point of a large open area to explore if there aren't any pretty vistas or interesting visuals to see? The journey is what matters after all, not so much the destination. Good vistas and visual design can go a long way to making the area feel nice to explore. Does Soul Valley have any interesting visual design? Not exactly. There's no day or night cycle to the area, so you are stuck with the warm oranges and reds of a desert. The skybox has the usual sky cloud blue, mixing into a bit of purple if you look up. Out in the distance, there are various dust clouds and storm formations, but that's about it. The one time it does change up, with the rain of green energy though, is pretty cool, coating the skybox and ground in an almost sickly green that, in moderation, would be quite vibrant and lively. What about landmarks? Well, there is Chrono Tower in the center, using that trademark sleek, pure white, and rounded architecture of the Lemorne. But it's blocked for most of the game and isn't accessible until the very end. There are a few Galactic Federation crash sites strewn about, reminding the player that it wasn't just us that was taken into the wormhole at the beginning of the game. But outside of the occasional missile or shot upgrade, they are another location that serves no purpose until the end with the golem parts. The best you get with landmarks are each of the respective zones off in the distance in their corners, like the volcano, the mountains of the ice belt, or the gigantic sinkhole and bridge going down to the mines. And yeah, okay, they are neat to see. Are there perhaps any interesting uses of elevation to create a sense of traversal, movement, or variety? As a desert, there are of course slight curves to the dunes up and down, but any significant structures like bridges are restricted only to the area around the Great Mines. A huge ramp and runoff is off to the right of Volt Forge's entrance, and that's about it. And rocks, ledges, small bits of terrain, they are mostly stuck to the outer ring. You won't be getting much more the closer inwards you get until like right around Chrono Tower. On a visual level, Soul Valley doesn't necessarily piss me off per se. And on an artistic level, I suppose that all this is meant to communicate a feeling. I praised the areas earlier for evoking the tragedy of Lemorne and their story after all. And the desert could be doing something similar, a feeling of isolation or quietness, an area they just couldn't transform or change for the better, unlike the other locations. But any sense of those emotions just comes and goes like the wind, not really sticking. When the other areas can evoke such strong emotions or feelings for the Lemorne, having a location that you spend a huge portion of a game in just to give an sort of mood can be compromising to the player's enjoyment. Okay, that's all visuals though. What about the traversal in Soul Valley? That's the second main thing about making a huge open area like this, and what developer Kensuke Tanabe was talking about when it came to the process of making the Viola. Movement can indeed make a world's difference in the enjoyment of an area or game in general. So how does Viola feel? The controls are fine enough to do what they are meant for. Sticks to move or still direct the camera, B button to speed up with the boost, ZL to drift and make the turn adjustments you need, and A to use the projectile. The projectile is definitely the weakest part of the kit, and while can lock onto multiple targets at a time, is still the only reliable offensive tool you have. So whenever you fire, you are going to be waiting for it to return just so you can fire again. Not that any enemy, while in Viola, is going to require extremely fast shooting or reactions, but still. Your only other option is this power drift you can do if you press B again while boosting. The drifts can take a bit to get used to at first, but once out in the desert, you do get a hang of it and it feels like second nature. Albeit with one slight annoying caveat. Since Viola has no reverse button, if you have to make minute adjustments to, say, hit a tiny object you may have missed, you are going to have to try and drift lightly around to line yourself back up and hit it. And if you miss, you gotta do it again, and again, and again. It is by far the most annoying aspect of Viola's movement, and goes to show that while I will say the bike can be fun to control and feel nice at top speed in a wide open zone or off a ramp, that it doesn't do precise movements all that well. All this begs the question though, what do you do in Soul Valley? What's the point of it being here and needing Viola to drive across it? Goals or objectives are the third, and arguably biggest aspect for any semi-open or explorable zone, as without an interesting or engaging enough hook, players can easily fall off. And the answer I'd give for Soul Valley is, it's something alright. First, and more minor, there are a few Lemorne shrines scattered across Soul Valley that act exactly like the ancient shrines in Breath of the Wild. They are underground spaces that at most consist of a few rooms that have a puzzle or two to solve in them. Usually this requires an elemental shot related to that shrine, though some don't need it. These shrines generally contain upgrades for your shots, allowing you to do charge attacks as well as even stronger charges, in addition to a few having expansions for missiles, shots, and even energy tanks. But some will also have deposits of green energy crystals to harvest, which brings me to the second and major thing in Soul Valley. Early on, Samus is told by the Lemorne that besides getting the keys for the Master Teleporter, she will also need to gather what are known as green energy crystals. At first, I thought that this would be our equivalent of the Sky Temple keys for Metroid Prime 4. And while the idea of them unlocking our final area in the game was correct, the manner in which it is done is entirely different. Instead of being a set number of items, green energy is determined by this little bar on the left side of the objective's menu, and each crystal deposit destroyed contributes a small portion to said bar. It is our job to gather as much throughout our journey and create the memory fruit, this collection of the Lemorn's entire history and knowledge to safely plant outside of Viros. These deposits can be found, like I said, in the shrines, but more often you will find them as these little crystals in Soul Valley overworld. There's barely any, if at all, in any other location in the game, and that's my big issue with the crystal grind, to be honest. It's one thing that this is the main and only thing you're doing for most of your time out in the desert, that you are having to ram into these chunks over and over and over again, turning around if you miss a slight bit, knowing that it all contributes only a small portion of the bar. It's one thing that you're doing all this with no music at all, which may just be a me thing, but wasn't even that big of a deal. But the fact that the game doesn't even spread them throughout the other levels, in spite of playing such a huge role in the game, is souring. So much of a tedium of the grind, of needing to collect 100% by scouring the whole damn desert, even 200% for gallery items, could have been absconded with by sprinkling them throughout the levels, making dedicated little deposits, carts, boxes, cargo, even rooms in the material would help so much and give an extra, natural incentive for exploration that is in line with the Metroid formula, instead of the Breath of the Wild-styled exploration that, even before the game came out, was already fading in the public zeitgeist. To put an analogy onto the whole experience, it's less of a massive gash or limb removal in terms of enjoyment, and more so death by 1,000 tiny cuts. It starts out just fine, but the more you play, the more it adds on to and questions several other design decisions. Viola only gets so fun so long as it remains interesting, which it doesn't with doing the same thing again and again. Soul Valley could be nice to take in, if there was anything else but this and the too few shrines scattered throughout. The ambience and desolate feel could work, until the game remembers that, oh wait, there needs to be some content or stimulus, so they throw in some of the most annoying enemies that will randomly pop up. And the whole premise of a wide open zone like this feels like an illusion, when basically all it is a disguised loading screen from one place to another. You are told when first going through that you could choose whatever location you like, which was another saving grace that, to my knowledge, made Breath of the Wild interesting. But even that turns out to be a lie because of a standard Metroid progression. You must go to Volt Forge after Fury Greens, you must then go to Flare Pool for the Fire Shot, so you can then go to Frostbelt and then go to the Flare Pool, and you get what I mean. In another reality, this could have been really interesting if fully committed to, but as it stands, leaves the desire of just one connecting pathways between the zones rather than this wide open space. Speaking of being told where to go, let's talk about that other controversial factor to Metroid Prime 4, the characters and storytelling. Before release, several trailers and videos decided to focus on the introduction of brand new characters that would accompany Samus throughout her journey. This, along with early reviews and demos by sites like IGN, colored an impression of a game for many people. Quickly, monikers all too familiar in our time like MCU dialogue reared its ugly head, making many people believe that the entire game's dialogue would be like this, or covered in escort missions. For the most parts, I think the dialogue and characters in Prime 4 aren't that bad, contrary to what many people may say or think. It is definitely at its most jarring at the beginning when you are introduced to Miles Mackenzie, having the most awkward lines in character of being the enthusiastic tech nerd. And I won't pretend that the line of "it's about to get real nerdy in here" didn't get a glare from me. He loves blabbing about technology and has a fascination with the Lemorn with whatever they may offer, which means that he is the NPC you'll be interacting with most whenever you bring him new tech like the shots, blatantly telling you what the shots can do against enemies and obstacles around you, even though there is a room by the camp that's whole purpose is to teach and familiarize you with the abilities. It goes beyond to things like missile pickups, going into Morph Ball, saying to use missiles on hard-shelled enemies, commenting about the situation around him, and telling you where to go if you dilly-dally too long in Soul Valley. Everything I just mentioned, though, is, for the most part, tied to the at most 10 minutes you spend with him and your party, staying at base camp once it is established. And I cannot emphasize enough that the whole game isn't like this. There will be situations where you encounter more Galactic Federation troops, but they are all for their own individual moments and set pieces. Most of the time, the game just leaves it to you and Samus to explore the environments. Ezra Duke is the no-nonsense, stern, strong commander that is able to make the tough choice or sacrifice. Nora Armstrong is the rookie in terms of skill, but shows a lot of potential and holds Samus in high regard. View is just awesome, to be blunt, this massive robot that punches fiends to death and speaks in this strong, robotic, straight-to-the-point manner, and Tokabi is probably the one with the most time or development besides Miles, having several points towards the end where you can meet up with him and hear his family tales, how he joined the Federation, or even his faith in Solon. They aren't the most complex characters in the world, sure. They stick to a lot of tropes that they are designed with, but they do their job just fine. And honestly, there are some highlights in the occasional group chats they can have when you return to camp. Here are a few that caught my attention and I liked. There's one where Miles and Nora are talking about grievers around the base.
Probably grievers.
Oh, come on, that's even worse!
What? Why?
Ghosts don't eat people.
I'm more afraid of ghosts. If it's a griever, shooting it down will make it quiet.
One where View wants to keep his memories and experience of Viros once he gets back.
Everything you do here, everything you learn, they're going to take all that away from you.
They will transfer my memory to an external analysis device, and then wipe my core. Though I do plan to petition to keep my memories.
Me too, buddy. Me too. And when it comes time to petition, I'd be more than happy to write you a letter of recommendation. You've earned your right to remember who you are, so far as I'm concerned.
This means a great deal to me, Sergeant. I will take you up on your offer.
And one where Duke is trying to remember the lyrics to a song and View answers, not just with the title and offer, but continues singing the lyrics of a song.
And so you see why I am crying at the thought of you alone. Let us spend this moment lost above the stars are watching us fall. Fields of vision overlap.
Wow, that was beautiful.
Thank you.
If there is one character, however, that I think got shafted more than any other, it would definitely be Sylux. This guy has been built up since Metroid Prime Hunters in 2006, the secret ending in Corruption in 2007, the secret ending in Federation Force in 2016, and finally gets his spotlight as the central villain, only to feel like barely a footnote. The best comparison I can make for Sylux in this game and how he was treated is honestly Infinite from Sonic Forces. Both were hyped villains in one way or another, both had huge expectations around them, both had potential in terms of backstory, characterization, and what they could do for the franchise, and both ultimately became punchlines with "I am not weak" or angry yelling. Most of the actions and screen time he has, even in the backstory, gives off the vibe of him being a dumbass or aura farmer, someone made to look cool without any backing. He gets humiliated by Samus in the opening cutscene. He appears multiple times throughout the game for the trademark rival fight, only to not actually be Sylux and instead just a Cybot. There are questions of if Sylux is even on the planet, and Sylux, the real Sylux, only appears at the very end for the final boss, screaming and yelling at Samus, all while psychically projecting flashbacks into her head. For clarification, I do not hate the idea of Sylux being an overly ambitious, spoiled, power-hungry child who cannot take blame or responsibility for anything. A villain or character being like that is not an immediate point against them or the writing, and like everything, has to do with how it is written and executed. One of the major themes in the game, after all, is the idea of dealing with loss. The Lemorn suffer a fate brought about by their own actions, drying up resources and accidentally transforming their own people into monsters because they believed that sharing psychic powers would be good. There is nothing left they can do, and they have to accept the fact that this is the end of their race, but not the end of their legacy. The way the Lemorn people move on is to think for their future, to provide a legacy that other cultures could learn from, and thus they could be laid to rest. Sylux represents a dark mirror to that, a high-ranking Galactic Federation officer who always sought higher power, never content with his current position or helping out others. Head shoved so firmly up his ass that he cannot handle the idea of someone else taking his glory, his power away, and it cost him his entire squad. Only for Samus to come in, take away that possibility of power, and try to help him up. He can't take it or the idea of being weak like that. And I'm saying all this because, well, the Infinite comparison wasn't just for the sake of shitting on forces. Infinite has always had a fanbase of dedicated enjoyers, of course, but as of recently with the Chaotix case files, hype and optimism around the character has reached an all-new high, as they not only explain what happened to Infinite post-Forces, but expand upon his character and dive into the angle that he is an arrogant, up-his-ass jerk who constantly craves power to prove his superiority. In a sense, they make his inferiority complex the star of the show, and the main driving force for his actions. Someone who makes their own issues everyone else's problems.
Aimlessly I wandered the land, unknown, anonymous, stripped of the ruby's power, and of my rightful place as the world's destroyer. A pitiful thing I have become, exiled, disgraced, until one day I received a gift.
And I have a feeling that if Sylux gets focused on in a similar angle to this, delving into his anger and victim complex, his need to grab more power and prove himself, his refusal to help others, maybe even backstabbing and killing them, and with more screen time most of all, Sylux could be worthy of staying up there with the greats like Ridley, Dark Samus, and Ravenbeak. Why do I feel so sure of this? Well, let's talk about that in my overall conclusion on the game. Change is a scary concept to consider. In spite of the fact that we ourselves are changing every second of our lives, we as humans seem almost averse to the idea of change, astray from the normal and expected. But it's also necessary to evolve and see what works. In every sense of the word, I can see that Metroid Prime 4 was trying to change the status quo and bring about a new step in the formula. To be that next step, the evolution that a franchise needs is a radical idea. One that unfortunately doesn't always work out. While rocky developments, even the crunch of other games, is nothing new for Metroid, the circumstances around Prime 4 are particularly harrowing. A long string of development beginning all the way back in 2017, based on a vision by Nintendo and reportedly developers Bandai Namco, not Retro Studios, set the game on a collision course. Ideas such as the psychic abilities and the more open world design had already been established 2 years into development, but progress was not being made to a sufficient degree, and the vision of the game wasn't reaching the standards higher-ups were looking for. So, development swapped over to Retro Studios and was restarted. This was all confirmed by Nintendo of America president at the time, Reggie Fils-Aimé, who in 2018 stated that development of Prime 4 was going well, and that they had a lot of internal expectations. Only a year later in 2019 for an update video to come out, and confirmation via Senior Managing Executive Officer Shinya Takahashi that Prime 4's development had indeed restarted. More troubling than all that, however, was that in spite of being a new start for development, the team at Retro Studios were not allowed to change the already established concept and setting. Not only had Nintendo burned too much money in these past 2 years with Bandai Namco to be able to restart entirely from scratch, but Retro Studio, post-switchover, did not have the immediate structure needed to develop the game. So, outsourcing was done to other companies for details like background models or movie creation, all while informing staff of the plan and what to do. Now, the exact budget of Prime 4 is not exactly known. Nintendo is pretty secretive of the budget and production line for many of their games. Rumors and hearsay of a budget of 100 million have spread around courtesy of content creator Kiwi Talks, who has supposedly interviewed former Retro Studios staff before. But I've also heard that Kiwi Talks and these statements are a bit dubious with no official sources to back them up. After all, what is talked about by former Retro Studios staff may not necessarily be the case for the present. So, I will not consider those rumors and estimations into this analysis or as fact. Regardless, with just these bits of info on the game, everything else falls into place, and paints a truly fascinating picture if information relating to Bandai Namco's involvement is true. The final product we have is a result of all that internal strife and development. The lopsidedness with some of the best Metroid gameplay on the one hand, contrasted with the drab repetition of Viola, Soul Valley, and the green energy crystals, that's because Retro Studios couldn't do anything about those already established ideas. They knew well how much the perception towards Breath of the Wild's open world and traversal changed over the years, in addition to a number of games coming out and heightening the pace and speed of first-person shooters. The focus on more cinematic, dynamic storytelling with a cast of voiced characters, another Bandai Namcoism from their other projects that can neither be removed nor expanded upon any further. According to Go Nintendo, devs had planned for more scenes and events that would have expanded upon the Galactic Federation troops, something that Tanabe regrets not happening, as interviews before then illustrated how much he wanted people to try to connect with them, for their battle dynamics to reflect their personality, and for people to hesitate when it came to that final decision. This is also probably why character interactions outside of progression are limited to the times you return to the hub, or the few sites you can find Okabe in Soul Valley. It was the most they could do, and all the others probably would have had more.
Viros is a dangerous place. We'll need to stay on our toes.
I'll just stay here, in my nice little bubble.
No place is ever truly safe. Have you ever fired your weapon in the field?
No. Not since basic.
May I? Like this. Finger stays clear until you mean to use it. It'll get easier with time. You just have to breathe.
Got it. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Do you remember that guy on base who used to drive the transport?
Who?
Bald guy. Big beard?
Yelton Daro? The cabbie?
Yeah.
What about him?
He owes me 40 Sakuru.
Ha!
Never gonna see that money.
No, you are not.
And the absence of Psylocke throughout much of the campaign? Probably another symptom of that Bandai Namco development, with them putting Psylocke into the background as a shadow presence like the titular Metroid Prime. Except with Metroid Prime, the whole game, the Planet of Talent 4, the logs, the space pirates, Phazon, It was all about Metroid Prime and its influence. Prime 4, meanwhile, is mostly about the Lemorn and their history, their struggle. The lack of presence isn't helped by the fact that back when Prime Hunters first came out, Tanabe wanted to keep Silux's backstory shrouded in mystery, requesting that the developers not finalize his details so that Tanabe could touch upon those details, revisit them, and expand upon the universe of Metroid and Prime in the future. So this intentionally vague origin and lack of explanation was for sure planned to be expanded upon more, had the game's development not gone like this. Like I said earlier, context matters, even if it doesn't forgive every design decision. In my mind, I can't help but look at this game like an alternate Devil May Cry 2. Two games that in a lot of ways, both share the common trait of being dealt a bad hand and needing to work with the best they have. It's also personally maddening knowing the story, while some people throw an endless crusade to paint this game as if it is the death of the franchise. A title so abysmal that it will launch Metroid back into the Dark Ages, or even kill the Prime sub-series. Granted, such logic isn't without reasonable worry, considering that Metroid is a franchise that, despite its notoriety, struggles with sales, especially in Japan, but it is still baffling. You see this kind of doomerism mentality all over the internet with sites like YouTube and Twitter, with official sales reports on the best-selling Switch games of the December 2025 season not being safe from this either, as loads of people flooded the comments wondering about the lack of Prime 4 anywhere. Some were more reasonable, but others took to it as a sign that Prime 4 was a surefire failure, acting like it was retribution against the developers for making such a shit game. That yeah, this will show them what for, or that this will show them that Prime is dead, 2D is supreme, and that it should only go with 2D. Like, what the fuck? What is this shit-ass tribalism? Nobody even stopping to think that Metroid Prime 4 literally came out just earlier that month, and so probably didn't have enough numbers to reasonably report compared to games like ZA that were out for multiple months at this point? Or that sales for Prime 4 would be divided between Switch and Switch 2? And what do you know? Various reports have come out after that period of time corroborating that Prime 4 did indeed cross over the million units sold threshold combining both versions. It's frustrating, honestly, how reasonable concerns and critiques turn into full-on doomerism and tribalism, blowing the problems of the game way out of proportions, all while profiting off of sensationalism with absurd titles and videos. Because yes, this game has problems. I have gone over them for a good portion of the video on how it botches the design of the game. How it's all very lopsided and uneven with some incredible, great highs matched by tedious, unimaginative lows that sacrifice the gameplay people know and love. But shit like this is not worth getting this upset and angry over. Nor is it even all that bad. Insinuating that Metroid Prime 4 is anywhere close to the abysmal depths of Federation Force and Other M, the latter of which actively assassinated the main character of the whole series, is insanity. I know this is not the Prime 4 many people wanted after over a decade of waiting. I know that the previous games have such a monumental place in the landscape of gaming, and that the ending note that this game leaves on may not be the most fulfilling. That's all understandable, and I lament alongside you. But we can't go clinging to the past and what could have been. Things may look bleak with Tanabe having left Retro Studios after release due to retirement, but I don't think things are over just yet. Ideas and planning for Prime 5 continuing the Silux saga had been conceptualized during development and after release. And given the 1 million units sold, which is a massive deal for Metroid, we will be seeing these two characters once more. For all that it's worth, lows and all, I enjoyed Prime 4 much more than I disliked it. The aesthetic of the game is one of the best I have ever seen. The environmental storytelling and lore with the Lemorn is tragic and beautiful. The soundtrack is an utter banger, and the combat is at its greatest with some wonderful new gameplay additions and a stellar boss roster. I was truly happy by the end, having formed my own special experience and opinion of the game. Something that is one of the biggest things I look for and value in any experience. And given how much this game has occupied my mind, how I am actively entertaining the idea of doing it all again on hard mode, I'm sure it won't be leaving my mind anytime soon. The Fate of the Lemorn is a meta-narrative, ironic parallel to the feelings that this game produces, complete with amazing triumphs and low failures. We may lament about the past and what could have been, but the most we can do now is move forward, carry that legacy to learn from, and inform the future. Thank you all so much for watching the video today. Special thanks and honorary mentions, as always, goes to my YouTube members Edgy Ziggy, Blast Shooter 8791, and Freeholations 8864 for their continued support of the channel. This video took a lot longer than I was expecting it to. I finished my playthrough of the game and did the script in about April of this year, so yeah, that's over 4 months or so of hanging on to this video. And you know how it goes, stuff happens. But ultimately, I am glad to be done with this video and to have worked on it because this was very interesting going back to the old review format of Royal Autopsy, which has not been done since the Monster Hunter Rise episode. And doing it for a game as interesting and divisive as Metroid Prime 4. Because I had a lot of thoughts going through it the first time. There were some things that stood out to me, some things that I felt and agreed with on people, but other things that I did not or disagreed with in terms of the drastic overreaction. So I figured that this would be a good opportunity to not only revisit the review format, to revise it a little bit with the more modern touch and professionalism, as well as redo some of the graphics and edits, and also just give my thoughts on Prime 4. Because even with everything that's going on, yeah, I still enjoyed it more than I disliked it. Now, whether there will be more of these reviews in the future, how frequent that will be, I cannot say for certain. You're going to have to be on the lookout for that in the future whenever it does happen. But as always, you are free to agree or disagree in the comment section below. Keep it nice and civil, everyone, please. And yeah, that has been all for the video. I have been the Monarch of Dragons, and I hope you all have a fantastic day / night wherever you live. Peace and Kalusvolt.